Welcome to the Prescription for Admission podcast, where we talk about hospitals and hospital-based care, who you can expect to meet, and what you may experience during your time in the hospital, both as a patient and also as a healthcare provider working in a hospital. My name is Dr. Monique Nugent. I am a practicing hospitalist and also the author of Prescription for Admission, the book, where I talk about many of the same topics. Thank you for joining me and enjoy the show. Hi, and welcome back to the Prescription for Admission podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Monique Nugent. I'm a hospitalist and author and writer and podcaster where I talk about hospitals and all things about hospital-based care. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by a mom and an advocate. Jenn, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So Jenn Robb is a nurse practitioner, a coach, author, wife, and mom who has worked tirelessly to help her daughter navigate healthcare through anxiety, depression, trauma, and all of the exhausting, heartbreaking layers that come with navigating teen mental health in today's world. So, Jenn, I'm really excited for you to be here because you're talking about two things that we don't talk about often on Prescription for Admission because I think people don't think about these things. One is teens and that really unique time in your life where you're learning how to navigate things by yourself, how to advocate for yourself, think about what your goals are, but also you need the support of your parents and your support system, right? And how we interact with patients and their family members at this really unique point in development and in becoming who they are and how they're going to go through healthcare. And the other thing that people don't think about in hospitals is mental health. We kind of put hospitals and mental health like over here in the psych hospital world, and that's not the case, right?
Right.
How people come into care for mental health has a lot to do with navigating hospitals as well, acute care hospital settings. So, Jenn, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm super glad. Mental health is one of those things that people don't really want to talk about because I feel like there's still a stigma around it,
Yeah.
right? But when you look at mental health and its climb, I mean, the statistics out there are just becoming astronomical because it's affecting every layer, right? From kids to adolescents to young adults to even older adults, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because it affects every aspect of our life. And I would always say that I think that there's probably not one person that I've ever met that hasn't known or know of someone who has struggled with mental health, right?
Yeah.
In any capacity. It doesn't necessarily have to be like to the nth degree where they need like a psych hospital, right? But it affects some aspect of almost everyone's life.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think that we like to think of ourselves as very insular and very much the exception to the rule. But most of us, if not all of us, will at some point in time meet some kind of criteria to technically have a mental health issue, right? Even things like grieving. There's normal grieving and there's abnormal grieving. Moving, starting a new job, adjustment disorder, right? There are so many ways that mental health interacts with our healthcare. But yes, you're right. People don't want to talk about it, particularly in the acute care space. Like they're like, oh, I'm here for my heart attack. I should only be talking about my heart attack. And it's like, well, I also need to make sure you're taking your Prozac because what you're going through health-wise is going to affect your mental health, and your mental health is going to affect your health. And so this is a conversation that in my book, I have really small little blurbs from a psychiatrist, a very close friend of mine, because I wanted to put it throughout the entire book to say, this is something you should be thinking about at all points in time in a hospital stay. So thank you so much for bringing this up. But let's start the conversation about navigating adolescence and hospitals. Let's start the conversation with the big thing. Okay. like, you know, um,
Adolescents alone are hard, right? I mean,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, especially like when you have even, parents, adolescents are just hard. Those are their very formative years. And there's so much nowadays that affects them.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily affect them in a really positive way, right? Because some of them have too much freedom with devices and technology and all of those things, and all of that feeds into their brain's development and can ultimately affect their mental health, right? I mean, just the things that they see on a day-to-day basis on all of the social media platforms.
Yeah, no. There's one of my favorite books that I actually was talking about it a couple of days ago with another mom was is the book The Anxious Generation, really talking about and delving into the effect of access to devices and access to social media and access to like people's opinion about you.
Right.
Like, which is so hard because adolescence is all about people's opinions about you,
Mhm.
and learning how to separate yourself from that. And yeah, and that's like a whole different topic that we've just like let in the beast into these kids' pockets to say,
Mhm.
hey, listen to the world's opinion about you. But totally different topic. One of my favorite. But that time in your life when you're learning how to do things on your own, right? And then you need assistance navigating healthcare is daunting, right?
Mm.
But if you throw on top of that an anxiety disorder, depression, and having to navigate the space of mental health care, which is very fragmented, extremely opaque at points in time, that's got to be, I don't even have a word. I want to say heavy, but that has got to feel like the weight of the world on an adolescent,
Mm.
right?
Well, I mean, you have to remember they don't even know. I mean, like, when my daughter started struggling, she was 12, right? I
Mm,
mean, there was no way that she could have advocated for herself because she didn't even know what she was often feeling or thinking
ah,
or was supposed to feel or think, right? And this is where like having a really strong support system and having an advocate in their corner is very, very important, right? Because there was no way that she could have talked to those counselors or to the therapist or to the psychiatrist and really said what she needed to say
mm,
or what she felt like she needed, right? Because honestly, there were many times that she didn't even know,
wow.
and
Yeah.
I think that that's why like writing the book was important because I feel like moms often don't feel like they have a voice, right? Like we often get caught up in the cycle of when we took them to the experts, right?
Mm,
And I've been in healthcare for over 20 years, right? I mean, and you watch their parents and people try to navigate those systems and not really know that they do have a point, that they have a very strong voice, and that they can stand up for what they need and what their loved ones need, right? And I just think back, to like little 13-year-old Chloe, my daughter.
mm,
There
yeah.
was no way. I mean, oftentimes she was in the fetal position, like crying and sobbing because she was so distraught over her own feelings. And then you have to add on to, oh, we got to go talk to someone and then try to explain to them what she's feeling or what had happened. I mean, it's just they can't do it. Their brains aren't developed enough to allow them to say what they feel. So being an advocate is crazy important. And like there's many times that even I know how to navigate healthcare, right? Because I've been in it for so long.
Yeah.
But parents kind of lose themselves. And I'm like, at the end of the day, you know your kid better than anybody, right? Like, and when we take them to the
Mm,
experts, their encounter usually is pretty brief, right? So like
yeah.
they're trying to come up with a plan, a diagnosis, a plan, and everything else in that very short window that they've seen you, right? And
Mhm.
so you do have to step in and be a voice, right? Because what is right or what the plan may be for the general masses may not be the right thing for your particular kid.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Chloe didn't know how to say what she was feeling because she may not even have understood. And what I was struck by was you said advocating is so important, but it also feels like speaking for them. It sounds like you learned how to speak for her at points in time. What was that? point, or I should say that process that you got to where you're like, "Oh, she doesn't really understand. Like, I can't even ask her to participate here because we're still stuck on what am I feeling? What am I supposed to feel?" Right? Because it is that time in their life where they're learning that. What are you supposed to feel? So, or how are you supposed to present that feeling?
Right.
Right? How did you come to that point to understand that in order to advocate for her, I'm going to have to understand her and speak for her?
I mean, she I remember her telling me many times, like, "I don't even know what is happening," right? Because there especially when the component of anxiety was taking over, right?
Mhm.
I mean, she was just so caught up in the feeling, but not really understanding, like, what the trigger was or what had caused it, even though deep rooted, she knew, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
hers ultimately resulted from a sexual assault from another peer, but there's so many emotions, right, that they're dealing with: guilt, shame,
yeah,
embarrassment. You know, now they've got anxiety, and now their grades are slipping. So there's that feeling of, disappointment. I mean, there's just so many things happening in their little brains that they don't really understand. And so now, speaking up for them is not doing the work for them, because in a
sure.
counselor's office, okay, there was no way that I could say, well, this is how she's feeling, right? But I
Right.
know my daughter, right? I knew her
Yeah,
body language. I knew if she said, "I'm fine," that's really mean I'm totally a mess, right?
yeah,
As a mom, you know these things about your kid, right? And so going into a counselor's or even a psychiatrist's office, it's like, okay, here's the backstory and here's where we are, right? Now, I wanted her to be able to speak up and to say what she was feeling, but oftentimes in those offices for the first times, you just got a blank look,
mm,
a very just silence, because she honestly had no idea,
yeah,
right? And then, you know, paying attention to their body language is another thing, right? I mean, Chloe had ultimately started cutting. I mean, that is a cry in of itself, right?
yeah,
Because that's an external form of, I don't know what's going on, but I know that in my head, Chloe used to always call it, there's just too much noise. There's just too much
mm,
noise in here, right?
yeah.
And that's the only word that she could come up with to explain what she was feeling, right? And so you have to take those external cues. Like, what are they doing? Are they retreating? Are they wanting to sit in a dark room in isolation? Are they cutting? Are they doing other things that they don't know how to express with words? And then it's important for you to take those external signs and then put them in words for them.
So, she was 12 when you guys started going through this. And at what age I would say, would you say you felt like she could speak for herself? She could you could start being more of a partner in her care.
She was probably 15. I
Yeah.
mean, and again, there's still a lot going on in that teen brain,
Oh,
right? I
yeah.
mean, their
Yeah.
bodies are changing, their hormones are, and all of those things. But finally, when she was probably the second half of her 15th year, she finally was confident enough and
Mm,
strong enough to say what she felt, right? And a lot of that comes with, I mean, when you think about anxiety and depression or any mental illness as a whole, right? Most often, that person doesn't feel strong. They don't feel
yeah.
worthy. They don't feel
Yeah.
confident, right?
Yeah.
And it took a lot of work to get her to a point where she was confident in saying, I'm not okay today,
Yeah.
right? And, mental health is one of those things that either as a parent or as a provider, you have to be very patient with in the journey, right? Even adults most often aren't going to open up and be like, well, and just kind of word vomit everything that's they're feeling, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't know. And so finding those strategic partners and those experts that can help them and kind of draw them out along the way, right? And I mean, we went through 3 counselors with Chloe before we found the right one, right? And the last one was very patient. I mean, there were often times that she'd be like, Chloe might have said 3 words in the whole counseling session.
Yeah.
But that was important because she was building rapport. She wasn't forcing Chloe to try to explain the noise that she felt in her head.
Hmm.
And I think that it's important for providers to understand that sometimes people cannot really put into words
Yeah.
what they're feeling. And you just have to be patient and kind of let them work through that transition into becoming kind of the confident person that they ultimately can speak up for themselves.
Yeah. So we're both pretty familiar with acute medicine, acute care that we don't, unfortunately, it feels like we don't have the time for the patients. When you are seeing a ton of patients in the emergency department, when you're thinking about safety, is this patient safe? Is this patient not safe? What would you give us as providers to say, hey, even in a space where you feel rushed, there's a way to do this? There's a way to speak to people who are struggling with their mental health, with anxiety, depression. What would be your tips for us?
I mean, I really think that it comes from a place of being non-judgmental, right? I mean, and really trying to be empathetic but sympathetic to the person, right? We often get caught up, especially like because I mean, I'm trained in ER medicine too, and oftentimes in the ER, you're just so used to seeing non-emergent things,
Right.
right? Like, and sometimes often let's ridiculous things that they come in for, right? Like you're just like, really? But I think as providers, sometimes we have to take that kind of jaded, hardened side of us
Hmm.
where and become a little more non-judgmental, right? Because sometimes people's what they come in for is really their cry for help, right? Like, and I'm not talking about like heart attacks, but if they come in for, broken arms, is there something more going on that it's just that I just fell, right? And it
Yeah.
really through Chloe's journey, I've even had to change like my perspective of how I talk to my own patients, right? Because
Yeah.
I feel like you're almost a little more discerning, right? Like you can see them as a whole person and not just the ailment that they're there for,
Yeah.
right? And I think that that's really important that as providers we learn that we're not just treating the symptom or the ailment that they're there for, right? Beneath that ailment, there is a whole person, a mind, a body, and a spirit, right? And we have to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're speaking of the choir. Totally talking to the choir. My medical school really focused on whole person care, and one of the things that they really pointed out to us is that the language we use around people, that person is a schizophrenic,
Hmm.
right? We don't walk around, other than diabetes, we don't walk around and say like that person is a lung cancer,
Yeah.
right? That person has schizophrenia. That person has depression. That person has this. These are the things, and we've got to see them as a whole person, not the disease process that you can say like that is the problem. It's not the problem. It's the patient. How do we view the patient as a whole? What advice do you have for parents? I know this is a loaded question because you literally wrote a whole book of advice, and we're going to talk about your book pretty soon. But what advice do you have for parents who find themselves in an acute care setting navigating mental health disorders with their child, because that's a very different setting than a counselor's office where you sat down, made an appointment. Usually you're there because there's something going on that you as a parent feel uncomfortable, unsafe with at home. And that's why you have found yourself in a hospital setting.
I mean, the first thing is you've got to trust your instincts, right? I mean, you just have to trust your mom or dad instincts that says something is not right.
Mhm.
I mean, and a lot of times we ignore those things because we're overreacting, we're imagining things. But again, you're the expert on your child,
Right.
right? And you know if something is really kind of off, right? I mean, just like when Chloe, it was in April 4th of 23, I couldn't get a hold of her. She had been doing better, but I could not get a hold of her. And I just knew in my gut that something was wrong.
Mm.
Right? And my boys came home. I sent them from school and was like, "Go home." And they had found her unresponsive. and she had accidentally tried, tried to take her life, right? Because
Mhm.
she had broken into a liquor cabinet and got, broke 2 locks and got into the liquor cabinet.
Mhm.
And it was because she wanted to quiet the noise, but had I just tuned that out saying, "No, something's wrong," the outcome could have been totally different, right? Because when
Yeah.
they found her, she was unresponsive, face down in a pillow, but with vomit around her, right? So,
Mhm.
like, medically speaking, you know of all the things that could have potentially happened, right?
Yeah.
But listening to your instinct and to your gut is first and foremost. But also don't be afraid to speak up in those settings. Like, the provider has only seen your person or your child for
Right.
5 minutes,
14 seconds.
right?
Like, they just walked in the room. Yeah.
Right? And don't be afraid to be like, "Okay, here's the deal, and here's what I've been noticing," right? Because you have to be able to speak up for them. You can't be afraid of the provider, right? I mean, in an ideal setting, you and the provider are a team, right? And I think oftentimes, even like in my own practice, I see parents don't really want to speak up because they don't want to, I don't know if insult is the right word,
Mhm.
the expert, the provider in the room, right?
Yeah.
Because we are the experts, right? We
Yeah.
are, and there's also this sense of like authority that comes with being a provider, right? We're
Mhm.
taught from a very young age that to respect authority. Well, medical providers are an authority in those settings, right?
And
And
we're
I feel
also a
like,
team, right? And I think that's what you're trying to say is, like, switch the view from
right,
authority to team.
right.
You
And
know your
work with
person
us
best.
and help us know the things that we don't know. What are they doing at home? Are they isolating? Are their grades dropping? You've got to tell us more than what the acute issue is
Mm.
for them being in there, right? Like, why are they in that acute setting right now? But
Yeah.
what's the backstory, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's important is parents have to find their voice, right? And they have to be able to say, well, she's been doing this, 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 and this, and now we're here, right? And I don't know that it's really anything to be afraid of, right?
Yeah.
Because when you change your view that that's not an authority figure, that you're a team and you're both working together for the same single purpose, right? Which
Yeah.
is healing or helping that child heal.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important is that we really have to change our mindset as the parent. I mean, we are the
Yeah.
expert on our child.
Every pediatrician that I've spoken to on this podcast has said exactly those words, from an intensivist to primary pediatricians to a hospitalist. You are the expert on your child. You are the expert on your person. And see us as a teammate, not just the person in the room who has the power. And it's hard though. It's hard because there is that power dynamic that I kind of am the gatekeeper for the next step, for the things that you may be looking for, you know? And so
Yeah.
it's not easy to reframe your thought process to say, this is my team member, not this is the captain of the ship, right? That we're even the captain is a part of the team,
Mhm.
right? Part of the team should be able to get down and partner with you and do the work. So I love it.
But
So
I mean,
this,
that's
yeah,
also changing the provider's mindset too,
yes,
right? Like that you are not just the captain of the ship. You are a team
a team
member.
member.
And no matter the walk of life that that other team member comes from, they're an important part to the puzzle, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like sometimes in medicine, especially the longer that we're in it, right, that we kind of get jaded in a sense, right? Or we've
Yeah.
kind of hardened ourselves and we just start really focusing on what they're there for, right?
Mhm.
What is the symptom that they're there for? But mental health, it's a game, right? I mean, it's not just a one singular thing that they're there for, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I literally had a patient in my office last week and she was all concerned about weight loss, right? I mean, just that was her, she was obsessed. She was a mom, she'd been pregnant, she gained all her weight, and she wanted to lose it. But the more she kept talking and I kept listening, I was like, "You're really more anxious. Like, you're
Mm.
really just seem to be pent up and frustrated.
Yeah.
Yes, about the weight gain, but there's something more, right? Like, you're trying to say that weight gain is your main issue, but at the end of the day, that's not, right? And it was that she had a child who was struggling with some major behavioral issues and it was wreaking havoc in the home.
Yeah.
And had I just dismissed it as like, well, let's just do this for your weight issues, instead of really watching her body language and hearing the words, then we would have completely dismissed that, right? And she would have gone out with a whole different treatment plan.
Mhm.
And I would not have been her advocate in that moment saying, now hold on a minute, right? Like, and I
Yeah.
feel like as providers, that's also a different skill set that we have to sometimes
It
relearn,
is.
because when we're first in medicine, it's easy, right? Because we want to help everybody, right? And we're
Yeah.
super like, oh, yay. But the longer you've been in it, we harden ourselves to really hear and to listen to the patient or to the patient's parent.
Yeah, learning to read a room, see the whole patient, see the whole picture. It's something that both comes with age, right? But also comes with intention.
Mhm,
You have to intentionally say, I'm going to put my preconceived notions down, you know? And it's something that I always, when I talk to other providers, but also when I talk to the community, I say, like, you gotta be aware. You gotta be aware that like your healthcare provider is coming from home or the post office or whatever other thing that they do in their world that is 100% human.
mhm,
And they're bringing with them their experiences over the years, their values, their religious thoughts, their cultural and political leanings, everything. They're bringing all of that with them to this interaction, just like you are doing that with that interaction as well.
mhm.
I think, during COVID, when everybody was, yay, healthcare providers and like ringing bells when you started a shift, there was this idea that, like, we were all like a different set of beings that came from the heavens and did a shift and then like went back up to the heavens. But no, like everybody's out there living their life, their complicated, life like everybody else is. And so in your practice, to our providers who are listening, in your practice, find a way to be intentional to put down all the things that you're carrying with you and go in and try to see the patient, for the whole person that they are. Try to see each encounter as the individual encounter, the new experience for that person. And for you as well. Like, you haven't met them before, or you
Right.
might have, you might have seen this patient in the ED a few times, but you haven't seen them this time. So what's new? Be open intentionally. I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
love that word
wonderful.
intentional, right? Because I
Yeah.
mean, that's true for the provider, but also for the parent, right? That is in there trying to advocate for their child. You have to be intentional with what you're offering and what you're telling them. If you leave out parts of the story that are pertinent to the reason they're there and expect them just to magically know,
Right.
well, that's not real life either, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the parent has to be intentional too, right? And offering up the full nuances of the story so that the provider can then make the best plan based on what
Yeah.
they do know. If they don't know, then they can't formulate a decent plan, right? And it
Yeah.
may just feel like to the parent that the provider's pushing them off. But at the same time,
'Cause we
you
don't
as the
know.
parent
Yeah.
didn't come out and say, "Oh, well, there's this, this, and this that she's also been doing," before we got to what brought us to the acute setting.
Yeah. And that story also tells a story of safety. If I don't know something, I can't build a plan that's safe,
Right.
Like, we could say, "Oh, try doing this." And if you know that that hadn't worked before, if you know that they're unsafe in that setting before, you know, please offer up that information so that we can circle back and make
But
a better
even for parents, it's okay if they offer something and say, "Let's try this," and go, "No, we've tried that before."
Yep.
Right? I mean, there are going to be many instances when you're navigating mental health that works for one, but it doesn't work for the other, right? Because we're all very different beings, right? And that's why, like, as a parent, you have to trust your instincts, but you also have to be willing to offer the whole truth,
Yeah.
right? And put yourself out there and say, "No, we've done that. It didn't work. She tried that medication and it made, she had this reaction," right? Providers don't magically know. what they don't know, right? And as a parent, you have to offer up that information. I feel like a lot of times parents, especially when it comes to mental health, there's that even as a parent, there's like almost that embarrassment, right? That shame
Mhm.
that comes with having a child who is struggling with mental health, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, mom guilt is a real thing, right?
Oh, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I feel like oftentimes people were looking at me like, well, what did you do? Well, how did
Oh,
you miss that? Right?
yeah.
And that's bringing another layer
Yeah.
into them in the acute setting, right? Because now mom may be embarrassed to tell you, I didn't pay attention to the sign that she was isolating. I missed it, right?
Yeah.
And now we're in an acute setting for, let's just say, self-harm,
Mhm.
right? And there's so many layers to mental health, right? It's not just the symptom of anxiety or depression or whatever. It's all of the other stuff that's underneath that sometimes we have to peel back to get to the root, right? As providers, but also as parents, they have to be willing to put the truth out there even if it's embarrassing to them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. It's one thing for the patient to maybe feel embarrassed or judged, but for you as their parent, that's an added layer that, you have to work through. And we as providers should also come, like you said, non-judgmentally. It's not just to the patient, but to, the whole situation. Come into this non-judgmentally.
Mhm.
You have given us so many amazing tips, Jen. And this is usually the part where I say, like, do you have a book but you do have a book
Mhm.
that tells, what your point is, and that is your book. Can you tell us a bit about your book? It's Warrior Mom, right?
So it's Warrior Mom Rising,
Warrior Mom
and
Rise.
in it I really wrote the book to try to tell moms and parents that you're not alone, right? There's other people that have navigated this, right? And it is oftentimes a very lonely, isolating journey, right? Again,
Mm.
and in the book, I talk about the mom guilt, the shame, the embarrassment, all of those things because I want people to know that you can do this, right? You're not alone. It's not an easy, we got some help and the problem is fixed, right?
Right.
Because that's not how mental health works. Okay. And sometimes you have to be prepared to play the long game when it comes to mental health. And that's okay. Right. But the book is really written from my perspective as the mother that was watching her child and then really having to step into that advocating role.
Yeah.
And then not only advocating for your child, but advocating for yourself, right? Because as the mom, we often
Yeah.
forget about us because we're so concerned with taking care of our child, right? And then still running the house and doing, working and doing all the other things that moms do on a day-to-day basis, right? And it's really important for moms not to forget themselves, right? So it's also helping them to learn how
Mhm.
to advocate for themselves so that both the child and the mom can overcome and then ultimately thrive, right? That's the game, is that's where we want to get to,
Yeah.
right? There's a transformation happening along the way. And sometimes it's really bumpy and it's messy and it's really hard, but there is hope on the end, right? If you just keep pushing and keep fighting for your child, but fighting for yourself as well.
Put your life vest on first, right? Isn't that the whole
Your
thing
oxygen mask. Put your
is
oxygen
oxygen
mask on
mask. Place your
first.
oxygen mask on first. Yeah,
Right.
because you've got to survive to get everybody else through it as well. Well, where can we find Warrior Mom Rising?
So Warrior Mom Rising is on Amazon. It is also on barnesandnoble.com. And then I have a website called warriormomcoach.net. And there's free resources on there. There's access to my book. There's access to my blogs. I mean, there's just a whole plethora of information on my website as well.
Oh, awesome. Well, awesome, awesome, Jen. This has been amazing, very needed, and thank you for all of the great tips. Particularly love that you ended with focusing on us as parents so that we can help sustain our children through navigating and advocating while trying to navigate mental health in an acute care setting or a hospital setting, healthcare setting in general. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you so much for listening to the Prescription for Admission podcast. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Monique Nugent. This has been Jenn Robb, our warrior mom, teaching us all about mental health and adolescence and navigating healthcare. You can find her book on Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com, and also on her website. And all that information will be in the show notes, so you can go on and click and see those easily. And thank you again for checking out the Prescription for Admission podcast. Like and subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, all of those things so that you can find us again the next time. Thank you so much.